Welcome to Suri Cheating Story, where we share true stories of betrayal in love. Our channel brings heartfelt, real-life experiences from those who have endured the pain of infidelity. Whether you're facing challenges in your own relationship or seeking to better understand the complexities of love and trust, Suri Cheating Story is the place for you. Subscribe now to explore the emotional depths in the path to healing with us. Ethan had always known struggle. He was born into a world that never gave him a fair chance. His parents had died in a tragic car accident when he was barely 5, leaving him with no family, no support, and no one to call his own. Raised in a foster care system that barely noticed his existence, he learned early on that the only person he could truly rely on was himself. By the time he turned 18, Ethan had aged out of the system, stepping into adulthood with nothing but a second-hand duffel bag of clothes and a desperate will to survive. There was no college for him, no secure future waiting just beyond the horizon. Instead, he found himself thrown into the world of manual labor, taking whatever work he could find to keep a roof over his head. For years, he worked as a construction worker in the city. The pay was barely enough to scrape by, and the work was brutal. Long hours under the scorching sun, his muscles aching at the end of every shift. But it was honest. It kept him fed. It kept him moving forward. Ethan lived in a tiny, run-down apartment on the edge of the city, one of those places where the walls were paper-thin and the neighbors screamed at each other through the night. The floors creaked with every step, and the ceiling fan rattled like it might give out at any moment. His furniture was whatever he could salvage from abandoned buildings or thrift stores. His mattress sat directly on the floor, next to a broken nightstand that barely held up the single lamp in the room. Loneliness clung to him like a shadow. He had no friends, no real relationships, just a cycle of working, sleeping, and existing. He had tried dating a few times, but it never lasted. Women didn't want a man with no future, no ambition beyond making it to the next paycheck. His ex-girlfriend had once told him, "You're a good guy, Ethan, but I can't build a life on nothing." That had been the last real conversation they ever had before she packed up and left. As the years passed, his outlook on life became numb. There was no dream to chase, no goal to strive for. He had accepted that he was just another nameless face in the crowd, destined to live paycheck to paycheck, waiting for nothing in particular. But something inside him still stirred late at night when the world was quiet, and the weight of solitude felt heavier than usual. In those moments, he wondered, was this all there was? Was he really just meant to exist and fade away, unnoticed and unimportant? One evening, after an exhausting day at the construction site, Ethan sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. The screen glowed in the dim room, displaying a nearly empty contact list. He had no one to call, no one to text. It was pathetic, really. Out of sheer boredom and frustration, he opened a social app, one of those random chat platforms where strangers could talk with no expectations. He wasn't looking for anything serious, just a distraction, someone to exchange words with so the silence wouldn't consume him. He scrolled through profiles, mostly skipping past overly polished pictures and exaggerated bios. He wasn't interested in the ones flaunting wealth or success. He just wanted something real. And then he saw her. Her profile picture wasn't some heavily filtered selfie. It was just a simple shot. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, holding a small child in her arms. Her bio was short, just trying to get through life. Something about it made him pause. It wasn't like the others. There was no pretension, no forced enthusiasm, just honesty. Without thinking too much, he sent a message. "Ethan, hey, rough day." A few minutes later, she replied, "Alyssa, every day is rough." That was the beginning. Their conversation started slow, just casual words exchanged between two strangers who had nothing to lose. But as they talked, Ethan found himself drawn in. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't pretending to have it all figured out. She wasn't selling a fantasy. She was real. She told him her story, how she was a single mother, working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over her daughter's head. How she had once dreamed of finishing school, of having a different life, but those dreams had been crushed under the weight of reality. Ethan understood that all too well. As the conversation deepened, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a connection, a sense of familiarity. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't alone. Ethan had never been one for spontaneous decisions. His life followed a predictable rhythm: work, eat, sleep, repeat. But something about his conversation with Alyssa that night unsettled that routine. He found himself thinking about her words long after their chat ended. Every night after work, their conversations continued. At first, it was just lighthearted exchanges, work struggles, late-night exhaustion, the small joys of making it through another day. But the more they talked, the more Ethan saw the weight Alyssa carried. She was 26, just a few years younger than him, but life had aged her in ways he could recognize. She had grown up fast, forced into survival mode too soon. Her daughter, Emma, was barely 6 months old and she had no one to help her. The father had left before Emma was even born. No family, no safety net, just her, trying to keep her daughter fed and warm. Ethan didn't know why he kept talking to her. Maybe it was because, for once, he wasn't the one who needed saving. He was always the one struggling, the one barely getting by. But here was someone fighting even harder, and it made his own problems feel smaller. One night, as he sat in his apartment, his battered couch sinking under his weight, he saw her message pop up. "Alyssa, you ever meet up with people from here?" It was a simple question, but it made his chest tighten. He wasn't the kind of guy who met up with strangers. People online were unpredictable, and he liked his life predictable. Lonely, but predictable. He hesitated before replying. "Ethan, not really." "Why?" Her response came fast. "Alyssa, no reason, just bad day." It was unlike her to be vague. "Ethan, want to talk about it?" A minute passed, then another. Finally, 3 little dots appeared. "Alyssa, I lost my babysitter. My boss won't give me another chance. I have rent due in 4 days and no way to pay it." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his hand over his face. He wasn't good at this. He didn't know how to comfort people, didn't have the right words. "Ethan, what about family, Alyssa?" "I don't have any." She didn't elaborate. He didn't push. But something about her words gnawed at him. Before he could overthink it, his fingers moved on their own. "Ethan, want to get a coffee?" He regretted it the second he hit send. She didn't respond right away, and he cursed himself for making it weird. But then, "Alyssa, yeah, I'd like that." And just like that, he had a plan. The coffee shop was one of those 24-hour joints, mostly empty aside from a couple of exhausted night shift workers and a guy staring blankly at his laptop. It was dimly lit, the hum of the espresso machine filling the quiet. Ethan sat at a small corner table, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee he wasn't drinking. He wasn't nervous, not exactly, but he was aware of how out of character this was for him. Then the door opened. Alyssa walked in, cradling a baby in her arms. He hadn't expected that. She looked smaller in person, her oversized hoodie swallowing her frame. Her eyes were tired, but even through the exhaustion, she had a quiet strength about her. Emma, nestled against her chest, made a small sound but didn't wake. Ethan stood awkwardly as she approached. "Hey," she said, offering a small, tired smile. "Hey," he replied. They sat down, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The reality of the situation was sinking in. He wasn't just talking to someone over a screen anymore. She was here in front of him, flesh and blood, with a baby who depended on her for everything. A waitress walked over. "What can I get you?" Alyssa glanced at the menu. "Just a tea, please." Ethan spoke before she could reach for her wallet. "I got it." Alyssa started to protest, but then sighed, nodding her thanks. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night pressing in. "Rough day?" Ethan finally asked. Alyssa let out a dry laugh. "You could say that." She hesitated, then sighed, rubbing Emma's back absently. "My boss fired me," she admitted. "I missed too many shifts. No one wants to hire a girl who has to leave halfway through a shift to take care of her kid." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had no idea what it was like to raise a child alone. But he knew what it was like to be backed into a corner, to feel like every door was slamming shut. "So what now?" he asked. She exhaled, looking down at the table. "I don't know." It was such an honest answer. So few people ever admitted when they didn't have a plan. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I get that." They talked for a while, nothing deep, just life, struggles, small things. But then as the clock ticked past midnight, Alyssa bit her lip, staring at her untouched tea. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said softly. Ethan frowned. "Okay." She looked down at Emma, then back at him. "I don't have any money left. Not for rent. Not for food. Nothing." Ethan felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Before he could speak, she continued. "I was considering doing something," she said carefully. "Something I don't want to do." He didn't need her to spell it out. He understood. His jaw clenched. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. Ethan sat back, exhaling slowly. He wasn't judging her. Life had backed her into a corner. He knew what that felt like, but something inside him twisted at the thought of her going through with it. She was tired, broken down, desperate. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the overwhelming urge to help someone else. He didn't know why. Maybe it was because he saw himself in her. Maybe it was because she was the first person he'd connected with in years. Or maybe it was because, deep down, he knew. If he let her go down that road, she might never come back from it. He exhaled sharply and looked at her. "Come stay with me." Alyssa blinked, stunned. "What?" He hesitated for only a second. "I don't have much," he admitted, "but I have a place, and I'd rather you be there than—" He didn't finish the sentence. She stared at him for a long time. Then, finally, she whispered, "Okay." Ethan wasn't sure what he had just done. Inviting Alyssa and Emma into his life had been an impulse, a gut decision made in the heat of the moment. But as they rode silently in his old, beat-up truck toward his apartment, doubt crept in. This wasn't like him. He didn't take risks. He didn't invite complications. But then, he glanced at Alyssa, curled up in the passenger seat, holding her baby close like she was afraid the world would take her away. And just like that, the doubt faded. When they arrived, Ethan hesitated before unlocking his apartment door. "It's not much," he warned, pushing it open. Alyssa stepped inside and took a look around. The place was small, cramped, barely furnished. The walls were dull, the floor scuffed. A sagging couch sat in the middle of the room, and the tiny kitchen in the corner looked like it had seen better days. But it was warm. Safe. Alyssa exhaled, a small, shaky sound. "It's perfect." Ethan scratched the back of his neck. He wasn't used to compliments. "You can take the bed," he mumbled. "I'll crash on the couch." Alyssa looked like she was about to argue, but then nodded. "Thank you, Ethan." It was the first time she had said his name out loud. Something about it made his chest tighten. The first night was quiet. Ethan barely slept, listening to the soft sounds of Alyssa soothing Emma in the next room. He told himself this was temporary, just until she figured things out. But the next morning, when he woke up to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the cheap instant kind he usually drank, he realized how much his life had already changed. Alyssa stood in the kitchen, Emma resting against her shoulder as she stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. Ethan blinked, groggy. "You didn't have to do that." Alyssa smiled, tired but sincere. "You let us stay here. Least I can do." She placed a steaming mug in front of him. It was the best damn coffee he'd had in years. From that morning on, things shifted. Ethan hadn't lived with anyone in a long time. At first, the adjustment was strange. He wasn't used to someone else moving around his space, filling the quiet with soft laughter and whispered lullabies. But the strange thing was, he didn't mind. He started looking forward to coming home. Instead of returning to an empty apartment, he walked into a space that felt alive. The couch had a baby blanket draped over it. The counter had a bottle-drying rack. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel completely alone. Days turned into a week, then another. Ethan and Alyssa fell into an unspoken rhythm, one neither of them had expected but both silently accepted. Ethan would wake up early for work, the smell of coffee already in the air. Alyssa wasn't working yet, but she made herself useful, keeping the apartment clean, making simple meals, taking care of Emma. At night, they would sit on the couch, exhausted but strangely comfortable in each other's presence. Sometimes they talked, other times they sat in silence, the sound of Emma's gentle breathing filling the space between them. It wasn't perfect. Alyssa still carried an invisible weight. Ethan could see it in the way she stared at nothing sometimes, lost in thought. And Ethan, well, he was still trying to figure out why he had let her in. One evening, as they ate a quiet dinner, Ethan finally asked the question that had been lingering in the back of his mind. "What's your plan?" Alyssa set down her fork, her expression unreadable. You mean for work? Ethan nodded. She sighed. I don't know yet. I can't afford daycare, so I can't take just any job. And I can't exactly drag Emma to work with me. Ethan thought about it for a moment. You said you worked in a diner before, right? Alyssa nodded. Yeah, but the hours were terrible, and I had no one to watch her. What if I help? The words were out before Ethan could stop them. Alyssa blinked. What? I mean, I get home in the evenings. If you find something part-time, I can watch Emma while you work. Alyssa opened her mouth to respond but closed it again. She stared at him like she was trying to read his mind. Finally, she whispered, Why are you doing this, Ethan? He exhaled, leaning back against his chair. I don't know. But deep down, maybe he did. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to have no one, to feel like the world was pressing in on all sides. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't want her to feel that way anymore. Alyssa looked down at her plate, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Then softly she said, Okay. And just like that, something changed. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both felt it. This wasn't just temporary anymore. This was something else, something real. At first it worked. Alyssa found a job at a small diner that offered evening shifts. It wasn't much, but it was something. She would leave just as Ethan got home, and he would take care of Emma until she returned late at night, exhausted but grateful. For a while, the arrangement seemed perfect, but reality has a way of creeping in, no matter how much you try to keep it out. The first fight was small. Ethan had come home from work, covered in dust and sweat, ready to crash on the couch for a bit before taking over babysitting duties. Alyssa had been waiting. You're late, she said, shifting Emma on her hip. Ethan sighed, tossing his work boots by the door. I had to stay overtime. Alyssa pressed her lips together. You could have at least let me know. I had to call my boss and beg them not to fire me for being late again. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I didn't have time to check my phone, Alyssa. I was working. She exhaled sharply. And I'm trying to work too, Ethan. If I lose this job, I lose everything. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't used to being needed like this. And maybe that was the problem. After that, something shifted. The tension between them wasn't loud, but it was there. Ethan started coming home earlier when he could, but he also found himself withdrawing. Alyssa noticed. You don't have to do this, you know, she said one night as they sat on the couch, Emma asleep in her crib. Ethan frowned. Do what? Take care of us. He exhaled. I want to help. Alyssa hesitated. Yeah, but for how long? She wasn't just asking about the babysitting. She was asking about everything. And Ethan didn't have an answer. So instead, he said nothing. The tension between them lingered. It wasn't outright hostility. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. But something unspoken stretched between them, like a crack in a foundation, widening with every passing day. Ethan tried to ignore it, to pretend things were fine. But he wasn't stupid. He saw the way Alyssa avoided certain conversations, the way she stared off into space when she thought he wasn't looking, the way her hands trembled ever so slightly when she counted out cash from her tips, as if no matter how many shifts she worked, it would never be enough. One night, Ethan came home late, later than usual. He had picked up an extra shift to make up for the lost hours earlier in the week. He expected Alyssa to be annoyed. He expected her to tell him again that she couldn't afford any more mistakes at work. But when he walked in, the apartment was empty. His stomach twisted. Alyssa's coat was gone. Emma's car seat was still there, which meant she hadn't taken the baby with her. Ethan checked his phone. No missed calls, no texts. A feeling he didn't quite understand settled in his chest. Something sharp, something uneasy. He waited. An hour passed, then 2. And then, well past midnight, the door finally opened. Alyssa walked in, her face pale, her eyes red. She looked at him like she expected him to say something, maybe even expected him to be angry. But Ethan just stared at her, waiting. She set her purse down on the table. She wouldn't meet his gaze. Finally, she spoke. I had to. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan's jaw clenched. Had to what? Alyssa swallowed. I needed money. Rent's due in 2 days. I was short. Ethan felt something inside him tighten. He didn't need to ask where she had been. Alyssa finally met his eyes, and there it was. The shame, the regret, the silent plea for him not to make this worse than it already was. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. "Alyssa, I didn't have a choice," she whispered, her voice breaking. He hated how familiar those words sounded. Ethan had spent his whole life making choices he didn't want to make, working himself to the bone, scraping by, doing whatever it took just to survive. But this was different. His hands curled into fists at his sides, not out of anger at her, but at the world that had made her believe this was the only way. Emma stirred in the crib, a soft little sound in the silence. Alyssa wiped her face quickly, as if trying to erase the evidence of whatever she had done. Ethan finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "You don't have to do this." Alyssa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then tell me what else I'm supposed to do." He had no answer. Because he knew. Sometimes the world didn't give you another option. The silence between them was different now. Before, it had been heavy with unspoken tension, questions neither of them wanted to ask. But now it was something else, something colder. Ethan wasn't angry, at least not in the way Alyssa expected. He didn't yell. He didn't call her names or make her feel worse than she already did. But he also didn't look at her the same way. And that was worse. The morning after that night, Ethan left early for work without saying much. Alyssa stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressed down on her. She had told herself it was a one-time thing, just enough to cover rent, enough to keep a roof over Emma's head. But the second she walked back into that apartment and saw the look in Ethan's eyes, she knew. It didn't matter how much she justified it. It had changed something between them. She spent the day going through the motions, feeding Emma, cleaning up the apartment, trying to pretend everything was normal. But when Ethan came home that evening, she could feel the distance between them like a wall neither of them knew how to tear down. They barely spoke. He wasn't cruel. He still helped with Emma. He still sat at the dinner table across from her. But the easy conversations, the quiet moments of companionship, they were gone. And it hurt more than she wanted to admit. That night, as they sat in the dim light of the apartment, Alyssa finally broke the silence. "Ethan." He glanced up from his plate but didn't say anything. She swallowed, gripping the edge of the table. "You don't have to say it. I know what you're thinking." Ethan set his fork down, rubbing his jaw. "You don't." It was slow, but things started to change. The tension faded. The conversations came back. And one night, when Alyssa caught Ethan staring at Emma as she babbled in her crib, something inside her cracked wide open. "You love her, don't you?" she asked softly. Ethan blinked, as if the question had caught him off guard. Then finally he nodded. "Yeah, I do." Alyssa's throat tightened. "She loves you too." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Alyssa, But she didn't let him finish. Instead, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I know," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Alyssa leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they were in it together. She looked up at him, her eyes soft with gratitude. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" she asked quietly. Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady, and nodded. "Yeah, we are." He smiled, and it wasn't the empty smile of someone who was just trying to survive anymore. It was a smile of hope, a smile that said, maybe things could be different now. In that moment, they both realized something. They had found the one thing neither of them had ever expected, a family. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you build, slowly, carefully, with trust, and with love. And for the first time, Alyssa felt like she had finally found a home. If you find this story interesting and want to see more touching, tense, but meaningful situations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this story with your friends and remember to like the video so we can stay motivated to bring you more great and meaningful content. Thank you for watching and supporting us.